Leicestershire, January 1818. The frozen earth of Hadley Court stretched beneath a sky the color of pewter, the ancient oak trees standing like sentinels along the drive, their bare branches held rigidly against the bitter gray sky. Inside the East Wing drawing room, Imogen Clare Fairfax stood before the marble fireplace in a traveling dress of deep charcoal wool, her gloved hands clasped so tightly that her fingers had gone numb, and tried to remember how to breathe. She was 22 years old, and today she would marry a man she had met precisely once. Her brother Richard paced behind her, his boots striking against the parquet floor with each agitated step. The nervous rhythm of his gait aggravated Imogen's mounting anxiety, reminding her of the cold transaction. He had sold her to pay his debts. She understood this with perfect clarity, though he dressed it in language about family duty and advantageous connections. The Earl of Hadley had paid £30,000 to clear the Fairfax name, and in exchange he would receive a wife young enough to bear children and obedient enough not to question the arrangement. The door opened without ceremony. Gideon Winter entered as winter itself might enter a room, bringing with him an atmosphere of controlled coldness that made Imogen's breath catch. He was 35, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair silvered at the temples and eyes the precise shade of a November storm. His face was handsome in the way that cliffs were handsome, all harsh angles and uncompromising lines. He wore black as he always wore black, mourning a wife 7 years dead. If you believe in second chances and stories where silence speaks louder than words, subscribe now and stay with us. You will not want to miss what happens when two people who have forgotten how to feel learn to love again. "Miss Fairfax," he said, his voice as measured as his stride, "the vicar is prepared. We shall proceed." Imogen curtsied, the motion automatic from years of training. "My lord." "We shall dispense with the custom of the wedding breakfast," he continued, addressing her as one might address a servant receiving instructions. "I have pressing engagements requiring my attention this afternoon. Your belongings have been moved to the Countess's chambers. Mrs. Daventry, the housekeeper, will acquaint you with household routines. Do you have questions?" She had 1,000 questions. She asked none of them. "No, my lord." "Very well." He turned toward the door, then paused without looking back. "I expect you to manage the household with competence and discretion. You will not interfere with estate business. You will dress appropriately and behave with decorum befitting your position. In return, you will want for nothing material. Your comforts shall be secured, but nothing further shall be required of either of us." "I understand," Imogen said softly. "One more thing." Now he did turn, and his gray eyes met hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken despite the ice in his tone. "My first wife was called Dorothea. That name is not to be spoken in this house. Not by you, not by the servants, not by anyone. Do I make myself clear?" "Perfectly clear, my lord." He studied her for a moment longer, something unreadable flickering behind that stony expression, then departed as abruptly as he had arrived. Richard exhaled loudly. "Well, sister, you have secured yourself an earl. Many women would envy your position." Imogen turned to face him, and for the first time in her life, she allowed her contempt to show in the stark, cold set of her features. Many women have not been sold like livestock to finance their brothers' gambling and mistresses. Do not speak to me of envy, Richard. You have purchased your freedom with mine. The wedding ceremony lasted 12 minutes. The vicar from the village church spoke the ancient words in a voice that trembled slightly. Whether from cold or discomfort, Imogen could not determine. Gideon placed a ring on her finger, a heavy gold band set with sapphires that had belonged to generations of Hadley countesses. His hands were steady. Imogen's fingers felt like brittle glass, threatening to shatter. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the vicar concluded, relief evident in his tone. Gideon made no move to kiss his bride. He signed the marriage register with swift, precise strokes, waited for Imogen to do likewise, then escorted her to the great hall where the household staff had assembled to meet their new mistress. Mrs. Daventry was a woman of perhaps 50 years, with iron-gray hair and a face that suggested she had witnessed much and been surprised by little. She curtsied deeply. "My lady, welcome to Hadley Court." "Thank you, Mrs. Daventry." Imogen managed a smile, though her lips felt stiff with cold and shock. The other servants lined up in order of household precedence. Imogen noted their expressions, cataloguing the curiosity, the sympathy, the wariness. They knew, of course, servants always knew. She was the second countess, the replacement for a beloved first wife, purchased rather than courted, and their master was a man who had sealed his heart in ice 7 years ago and never thawed. Gideon spoke once more before he left her. "Dinner is served at 8 o'clock in the formal dining room. You will dress appropriately. I will send for you when I require your presence in my chambers. Until then, acquaint yourself with the house." He was gone before she could respond, his footsteps echoing down the corridor toward what she would learn was his study, a masculine sanctuary where he spent most of his waking hours. Imogen stood in the center of the great hall and fought against the urge to weep. She had known this would be difficult. She had not known the despair would be so profound. "My lady," Mrs. Daventry said gently, "perhaps you would like to see your rooms and take some refreshment before dinner?" "Yes," Imogen whispered. "Yes, that would be welcome." The Countess's chambers occupied the south wing, a suite of rooms that had remained largely untouched since the First Lady Hadley died. Someone, Mrs. Daventry perhaps, had attempted to make them welcoming. Fresh flowers stood in vases, despite the season. Fires burned in both the sitting room and bedchamber, and Imogen's modest possessions had been unpacked and arranged with care. But the rooms held an atmosphere of melancholy that no amount of flowers could dispel. Portraits lined one wall, generations of Hadley countesses gazing down with varying degrees of hauteur and happiness. Imogen's eyes were drawn inevitably to the most recent addition, a painting of a young woman with golden hair and laughing blue eyes. "That was Lady Dorothea, my lady," Mrs. Daventry said quietly, "painted the summer before she died." Imogen studied the portrait. Dorothea had been beautiful, vibrant. Everything Imogen with her dark hair and serious gray eyes was not. "She looks happy." "She was happy, my lady. His lordship adored her." Mrs. Daventry paused, choosing her words carefully. Her death changed him. Before the tragedy, he was a different man, warm, even jovial at times. After she died in childbed, screaming for hours while the physicians could do nothing, something in him broke. He dismissed all the doctors, locked himself in his study for a fortnight, and when he emerged, he was as you see him now. "I see." Imogen turned away from the portrait, her throat tight. "Thank you for explaining, Mrs. Daventry. I shall not take it personally that he cannot love me. How could he, when his heart is buried with her? My lady, if I may speak freely, you are very young to hold such a resigned view of matrimony." "I am old enough to understand reality," Imogen replied. "Yet here, in the midst of his neglect, I believe I have found a purpose lacking in my previous life. Now please tell me about the household routines. If I am to be mistress here, I may as well perform the role competently." The dinner hour arrived with the inevitability of winter night falling. Imogen dressed with care in an evening gown of deep blue silk, one of 3 formal dresses she owned. Her maid, a quiet girl named Annie who had been assigned to her, arranged her hair in a simple style suited to a young matron. When she descended to the formal dining room at precisely 8 o'clock, she found the table set for 1. Mrs. Daventry appeared at her elbow. "His lordship takes his meals in his study, my lady. He finds dining in company disturbs his concentration on estate matters." "I understand," Imogen said, though she understood nothing except that her husband could not bear to share a table with her. "Then I shall dine alone." She sat in solitary splendor, at one end of a table that could seat 20, eating courses of excellent food that tasted like ash in her mouth, while servants moved silently around her, like ghosts attending a funeral. This, she thought, would be her life. Beautiful rooms, fine clothes, every material comfort, and an emptiness so profound it made her bones ache. After dinner, she returned to her chambers and waited. He had said he would send for her when he required her presence. The phrase echoed in her mind, with all its cold calculation. Not when he desired her, not when he wished for her company, but when he required her, like requiring a servant to perform a duty. The summons came at 10:30. A footman knocked discreetly and informed her that his lordship awaited her in his chambers. Imogen rose from her chair by the fire, where she had been pretending to read, and followed the footman through corridors lit by candlelight to the master's apartments. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone in the house could hear it. Gideon's bedchamber was as austere as the man himself. Dark wood furniture, heavy curtains, no ornaments or personal touches save for a single miniature portrait on the mantelpiece. Even from across the room, Imogen recognized the golden hair and laughing eyes. He stood by the window in a dressing gown of midnight blue brocade, his back to her. "Close the door," he said without turning. She obeyed, her hands trembling. "You understand the purpose of this?" he asked, still not looking at her. "Yes, my lord. I require an heir. The estate must pass to my son when I die, not to my cousin who would bankrupt it within 5 years. That is the reason for this marriage. Nothing more." "I understand," Imogen repeated, though each word landed like a blow. Finally, he turned to face her. His expression was unreadable in the candlelight. "Remove your dressing gown and lie down." What followed was mechanical, joyless, and mercifully brief. He touched her only as much as necessary to accomplish the act, his movements efficient and impersonal. He said nothing throughout. When it was finished, he rose immediately, turned his back, and waited for her to dress. "You may return to your rooms," he said to the wall. "I will send for you again in 3 days' time." Imogen fled. There was no other word for it. She fled back through the silent corridors to her empty chambers, where she finally allowed herself to weep, not from physical pain, which was minimal, but from the crushing weight of loneliness. This, then, was her marriage. This was her future. Years stretching ahead in this beautiful prison, sharing her body with a man who could not bear to look at her face, producing children who might never know warmth from their father because his heart was entombed with a dead woman. She wept until she had no tears left, and then she made a decision. If she could not have his affection, if she could not change the fact of her circumstances, she would at least ensure she was not useless. She would make herself indispensable in other ways. She would become the perfect countess, managing his household with such efficiency and grace that even a man of ice would have to acknowledge her value. It was a small rebellion, but it was hers. The transformation of Imogen Clare Winter, Countess of Hadley, began the next morning at dawn. She rose early, dressed in a practical gown of gray merino wool, and requested that Mrs. Daventry provide her with all household accounts, staff schedules, and inventories. The housekeeper's eyebrows rose nearly to her cap, but she complied, bringing an armload of ledgers to the Countess's sitting room. Imogen spent the entire day reviewing every detail of the household's operation. What she discovered appalled her. Not through any fault of Mrs. Daventry, who clearly did her best with limited resources and no direction, but through years of neglect from a master who cared nothing for domestic matters, and a previous countess who had been too young and too brief a resident to establish proper systems. The servants were underpaid compared to similar households. The still-room was poorly stocked. Repairs to the servants' quarters had been deferred for years, leaving them drafty and damp. The kitchen equipment was outdated. The household budget was simultaneously too generous in some areas, like imported delicacies that no one ate, and cruelly insufficient in others, like adequate winter clothing for the outdoor staff. Most tellingly, There was no sense of order or purpose. The household simply existed, performing tasks by rote, waiting for nothing because nothing was expected. Imogen set down her pen as dusk fell and made her second decision. If Gideon Winter wanted a wife who did not interfere, he had chosen poorly. She would run his household as it deserved to be run, and if that constituted interference, he could divorce her. She began with the servants. In her second week at Hadley Court, she called a meeting of all household staff in the servants' hall, an unprecedented event that sent ripples of speculation through every corner of the estate. "I am aware," she said, standing before them with her hands folded calmly though her heart raced, "that this household has functioned without proper mistress for 7 years. I do not presume to know better than those of you who have served here faithfully through difficult times. However, I do see opportunities for improvement that will benefit everyone." She outlined her plans. Increased wages tied to performance, repairs to staff quarters to be completed before spring, new kitchen equipment, a proper system for managing supplies to eliminate both waste and shortage, regular household meetings to address concerns before they became crises, and most radically, 1 half-day of leisure per week for every servant, a practice almost unheard of in great houses. The staff stared at her in stunned silence. "I will present these proposals to his lordship," Imogen continued. "If he objects, the responsibility will be mine alone. But I believe a well-cared-for staff provides better service, and ultimately, that serves his lordship's interests. Do any of you have questions or concerns?" Mrs. Daventry spoke first, her voice thick with emotion. "My lady, in 30 years of service, I have never heard a mistress speak thus. It would be an honor to help you implement these changes." The others murmured agreement. Imogen saw respect dawning in their eyes, and something more precious, hope. That evening, she did something she had not done since her wedding night. She knocked on the door of Gideon's study and waited for permission to enter. "Come," his voice called, sounding surprised. She stepped inside, her portfolio of household proposals held firmly in her hands. The study was exactly as she had imagined it, a masculine sanctuary of dark leather and darker wood, the walls lined with books on agriculture and estate management. Gideon sat behind a massive oak desk, papers spread before him, a lamp casting shadows across his austere features. He frowned at her appearance. "I did not send for you. Is something wrong?" "Nothing is wrong, my lord. I have prepared proposals for household improvements that require your approval and funding. May I present them?" His frown deepened. "I told you I did not wish to be troubled with domestic matters. That is your responsibility." "These matters require financial expenditure beyond normal household budget," Imogen replied, keeping her voice steady. "I will not commit your money without consent. However, I believe the investments will prove sound. May I explain?" For a moment, she thought he would refuse. Then he sighed and gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Very well, be brief." She was not brief. She was thorough, methodical, and persuasive. She presented facts, figures, and projected returns. She explained how improved staff morale would increase efficiency. She detailed how better equipment would reduce long-term costs. She answered every objection before he could raise it. When she finished, Gideon leaned back in his chair and studied her with an expression she could not decipher. "You have been here less than a fortnight, and you have analyzed the entire household operation?" "I had little else to occupy my time, my lord." "Indeed." He tapped his fingers against the desk, a gesture she would learn indicated he was thinking. "Your proposals are sound. You may implement them. Submit accounting reports monthly so I can track expenditures." "Thank you, my lord." Imogen rose to leave, then paused. "May I ask one question?" "Ask." "Why have you allowed the household to deteriorate so severely? You are clearly an intelligent manager of your agricultural lands. Why neglect your home?" His face became stone. "Because this house ceased to be a home 7 years ago, Lady Hadley. It is merely a structure I inhabit. Now, if that is all, I have work to complete." She curtsied and left, her heart aching for him despite everything. He was not cruel, she realized. He was broken. And broken things either mended or shattered further. She could not fix him, but perhaps she could keep him from complete destruction. The weeks that followed saw Hadley Court slowly awaken from its long sleep. Workmen arrived to repair the servants' quarters. New equipment appeared in the kitchen. The staff began to move with purpose rather than merely going through motions. Imogen was everywhere, supervising, encouraging, learning every aspect of her household's operation. She discovered she had a gift for management. Problems that had festered for years yielded to her methodical approach. She negotiated better prices with suppliers, reorganized storage systems, established routines that made everyone's work easier. The household accounts, which had been chaotic, became models of clarity under her hand. But it was her treatment of the servants that truly transformed Hadley Court. She learned their names, their families, their concerns. She visited the sick, arranged for the physician when needed, ensured that new mothers among the staff had adequate time to recover. She was fair but exacting, demanding excellence, but providing the tools to achieve it. Within 2 months, servants who had been merely dutiful became devoted. Mrs. Daventry told anyone who would listen that Lady Hadley was the finest mistress she had ever served. The footmen stood straighter when she passed. The maids sang while they worked. The house itself seemed to brighten, as though acknowledging it finally had a mistress worthy of it. Gideon noticed. He said nothing, but Imogen caught him observing her sometimes, his expression unreadable. He maintained his rigid schedule, separate meals, isolated days, mechanical visits to her chambers twice weekly like clockwork. But small things began to appear that she could not explain. A book on household management, far more advanced than any she owned, appeared on her sitting room table. She asked Mrs. Daventry about it. The housekeeper smiled mysteriously and said only that his lordship had mentioned the library contained useful volumes. The pianoforte in the music room, which had been sadly out of tune, was suddenly restored to perfect pitch. Imogen played it hesitantly one afternoon, running her fingers over the keys that now sang true. Mrs. Daventry mentioned casually that his lordship had sent for a tuner from London. Flowers began appearing in her chambers with increasing frequency. Not extravagant bouquets, but simple arrangements of whatever was blooming in the succession houses. Snowdrops in February, early crocuses in March, always placed by her favorite chair, never accompanied by a note. Imogen did not know what to make of these gestures. They seemed at odds with the man who could barely stand to dine in the same room with her. She wanted to ask him, but their conversations remained strictly limited to household business, brief exchanges in his study where she reported on her activities, and he approved her decisions with increasingly fewer questions. Imogen privately debated the meaning of the gestures, wondering if they were genuine failings of his resolve or merely expensive accidents. March became April. The Leicestershire countryside began its slow awakening from winter dormancy. Imogen walked the grounds daily, planning improvements to the gardens that had been allowed to run wild. She discovered a walled garden behind the east wing, overgrown but with good bones, and conceived an ambition to restore it to productivity. The walled garden, neglected but sturdy, seemed a perfect, tragic metaphor for her husband. One afternoon, as she sketched plans for the garden's rehabilitation, she heard something that made her pause. Music, a cello, played with heartbreaking skill and even more heartbreaking sadness. The sound drifted from somewhere in the house, mournful and beautiful. She followed the music through corridors she had not yet explored, into an older part of the house near the family chapel. The melody grew louder, drawing her forward until she stood before a door she had been told never opened. The music stopped abruptly. Imogen held her breath, uncertain whether to knock or flee. Before she could decide, the door opened. Gideon stood in the threshold, still holding his cello bow, his face transformed by an emotion she had never seen him display: fury. "How long have you been listening?" he demanded. Only moments, my lord. I heard the music and followed it without thinking. I apologize for intruding. This room is private. You are not to come here again. I understand. She met his eyes steadily, refusing to be cowed. You play beautifully. I did not know you were musical. There are many things you do not know about me, madam, and many things you will never know. Return to your activities and do not follow music again. He shut the door in her face, and she heard the lock turn with decisive finality. Imogen stood in the corridor, her heart pounding with an emotion that was part fear, part anger, and part something else she could not name. He played the cello with the passion he denied in every other aspect of his life. Behind that locked door, he felt things. He was not the man of ice he pretended to be. That night, lying alone in her bed, she made her third decision. She would not accept this half-life anymore. She would not be content with material comfort and silent gestures. If there was warmth somewhere inside Gideon Winter, she would find a way to reach it, or she would stop trying and learn to be content with emptiness. But first, she needed to understand what had broken him so completely that he could only feel when he thought himself unobserved. The answer came from an unexpected source. Lady Marguerite Aldridge, a neighboring landowner's widow, called one morning in early May. She was a woman of perhaps 60 years, elegant and shrewd, with eyes that saw more than most people wished to reveal. "My dear Lady Hadley," she said over tea in the drawing room, "I have heard remarkable things about the changes you have wrought at Hadley Court. I confess I am curious to meet the woman who has managed to breathe life into this mausoleum." "You are very kind," Imogen replied carefully. "I have merely implemented sensible household management." "Do not be modest, child. I have known this house and its masters for 40 years. What you have accomplished in 3 months is little short of miraculous." Lady Aldridge paused, then added gently, "Gideon's father would never have permitted it, of course. The old Earl believed houses existed to serve men, not the other way round. He was a hard man, and he raised his son to be harder still." "I did not know his father," Imogen said, sensing an opening to the understanding she sought. "Few people did, truly. He was Earl of Hadley for 50 years, and in all that time I cannot recall seeing him smile. He believed sentiment was weakness. He trained Gideon from childhood to suppress all emotion, to value duty above all else, to treat family as one would treat a state business, efficiently and without attachment." Lady Aldridge's voice softened with old sorrow. "When Gideon fell in love with Dorothea Bellamy and wished to marry her, the old Earl opposed it violently, called him a fool for being ruled by passion. Gideon married her anyway, the only time he ever defied his father. For 3 years, he was happy. Then she died, and it must have seemed to him that his father had been right all along, that love was indeed weakness, and weakness brought only pain." Imogen's hands trembled around her teacup. He loved her very much. He loved her with an intensity that terrified him, I think, because it contradicted everything his father had taught him. And when she died in agony, when he held her hand for 18 hours while she screamed and the physicians could do nothing, something in him concluded that his father's cruelty had been wisdom after all. Better to feel nothing than to risk such devastation again. "How do you know this?" Imogen whispered. "Because I visited him 3 weeks after the funeral, and I found him in his study, stone-faced and hollow-eyed, burning every letter Dorothea had ever written him. He said he was ridding the house of dangerous sentimentality. I slapped him across the face and told him he was destroying the only good his father's poison had not touched. He thanked me for the correction and continued burning letters." Lady Aldridge set down her cup with trembling hands. "I have not been back since. I could not bear to watch him become his father." Imogen understood now. Gideon was not incapable of love. He was terrified of it. Every small gesture, every book and flower and tuned piano was love leaking through cracks in the walls he had built. He wanted to care for her. He simply believed that caring would destroy them both. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly. "It helps to understand." "What will you do with this understanding, child?" "I do not know yet, but I will think of something." Lady Aldridge smiled sadly. "You are braver than I was. I wish you better fortune." May became June, and the season began in London. Gideon informed Imogen with his usual brusque efficiency that they would open the London townhouse for 6 weeks. "You will attend social functions as my countess. You will conduct yourself appropriately and reflect well on the family name. I will attend only those events where my absence would be remarked upon. We depart in 3 days." The townhouse in Mayfair was smaller than Hadley Court, but no less grand. Imogen threw herself into preparations with the same energy she had brought to the country estate. Within a week, she had the household running smoothly, staff trained, and calling cards sent to appropriate households. Her first major test came at Lady Rothwell's ball, one of the most prestigious events of the season. Imogen dressed with particular care in a gown of ivory silk with silver embroidery, her dark hair styled simply but elegantly. When she descended the stairs to where Gideon waited, she saw his eyes widen fractionally before his expression returned to its usual neutrality. "You look appropriate," he said, which from him was high praise. "Remember, you represent the Hadley name tonight, discretion and dignity." "I understand, my lord." They arrived fashionably late. The ballroom shimmered under the diffused, heated glow of countless chandeliers and the jewels of London's finest families. Heads turned as they were announced. The Earl of Hadley had not been seen in society since his mourning period ended, and curiosity about his new countess ran high. Imogen felt the weight of hundreds of assessing eyes. She lifted her chin and smiled graciously, her hand light on Gideon's arm. Lady Rothwell greeted them effusively. "Lord Hadley, such a pleasure to see you after so many years in seclusion. And Lady Hadley, we are delighted to welcome you to London society." "You are most kind," Imogen replied with perfect poise. "Your ball is magnificent. I shall endeavor to remember every detail so I may aspire to such elegance when I entertain." Within an hour, Imogen had charmed half the room. She conversed with a lively wit, yet with flawless deference. She remembered names and connections. She deflected invasive questions about her marriage with graceful humor. She danced beautifully, her years of training evident in every movement. And most importantly, she never once suggested that her marriage was anything other than one of complete and satisfied discretion. The other ladies noticed. Within a week, invitations flooded the townhouse. Everyone wished to secure Lady Hadley's attendance. She was invited to music halls, garden parties, Venetian breakfasts, and every significant ball of the season. She accepted selectively, building a reputation for discernment that only increased her desirability as a guest. But it was her management skills that truly distinguished her. When Lady Brentwood confided that her eldest daughter's debut ball was threatened by a crisis with the catering, Imogen quietly recommended her own excellent suppliers from Hadley Court and offered to consult on the arrangements. The ball was declared a triumph. When the Duchess of Melford found herself short-staffed due to illness, Imogen lent her 2 of her own highly trained footmen. When Mrs. Carrington from the merchant class nervously attended her first-ton event, uncertain of proper protocol, Imogen took her under her wing and ensured she committed no faux pas. Word spread. Lady Hadley was not merely beautiful and gracious, she was competent, amiable, and possessed of impeccable judgment. She became the lady everyone wished to know, the countess whose approval marked social success. Gideon observed all this with his usual inscrutability. He attended minimal events, stood at Imogen's side when required, and showed her no more warmth in public than he did in private. But she caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she could not interpret. One night, returning from a particularly successful musical where Imogen had been praised extravagantly by several influential hostesses, he spoke to her in the carriage. "You have done well. The Hadley name is spoken of with respect again. Thank you, my lord. I did not expect such competence when I married you. Imogen turned to look at him in the dim carriage. What did you expect? Compliance, adequate performance of duties, nothing more. And what do you think of me now that I have exceeded my prescribed duties? He was silent for so long she thought he would not answer. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he said, I think you are wasted on me. Before she could respond, the carriage stopped at their townhouse, and he exited quickly, retreating to his study as he always did. Imogen sat in the carriage for several minutes after he left, her heart racing. It was the most personal thing he had ever said to her. Not an endearment, not a compliment, but an acknowledgement that she deserved better than what he offered. It was progress, of a sort. Painful progress, but progress nonetheless. The season reached its height in July. At Almac's assembly rooms, where only the most elite families secured vouchers, Imogen danced every dance, conversed with duchesses and countesses, and conducted herself with flawless grace. She had become, in every sense, the perfect countess. Beautiful, accomplished, and above all, unflappable. It was precisely because she seemed unflappable that the incident at Lady Summersby's rout created such a stir. A young man named Captain Roger Bellamy, newly returned from service abroad and apparently deep in his cups, pushed through the crowd toward Imogen and Gideon with wild eyes. "Hadley!" he shouted. "Do you presume to appear in the society whose judgment you so brutally defied, Hadley?" A profound, shocking silence fell over the room, as if a curtain had been torn. Every eye turned toward them. Gideon's face became granite. "Control yourself, Bellamy. You are disturbing Lady Summersby's guests." "I will not control myself. Dorothea died screaming because you refused to summon proper physicians in time, because you listened to that hack country doctor while she bled to death. You killed her, and then you married again as though she meant nothing. Do not speak of her." Gideon's voice cracked like a whip, shocking in its intensity. "You know nothing of what happened. I know you let her die." Bellamy lurched forward, and several men moved to restrain him. Imogen stepped between them without thinking, her voice calm but carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "Captain Bellamy, you are in pain, and pain seeks someone to blame. But directing your anger at Lord Hadley serves neither your sister's memory nor your own honor. Your sister died from complications no physician of the time could have prevented. Lord Hadley did everything possible to save her. He has mourned her for 7 years. Your accusation is unjust." Bellamy stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. "Who are you to speak of my sister? I am Lady Hadley, and while I never knew Dorothea, I know that no woman would wish her beloved brother to destroy his life and reputation in her name. Honor her by living well, Captain, not by making scenes that would shame her." Bellamy's face crumpled. 2 of his friends led him away, murmuring apologies. The room remained frozen. Then Lady Summersby clapped her hands sharply. "Well, that was most unpleasant. Perhaps some music would restore the atmosphere? Lady Hadley, would you honor us at the pianoforte?" Imogen played 3 pieces with hands that did not shake, though her heart hammered wildly. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, and conversation resumed, the scandal diffused by her presence of mind. But when she returned to Gideon's side, she found him trembling, his face white as marble, his hands clenched into fists. "We are leaving," he said through his teeth. They departed immediately, rode in silence to the townhouse, and separated without a word. An hour later, a footman knocked on Imogen's door. "My lady, his lordship requests your presence in his study." She went, her mouth dry with apprehension. Gideon stood by the window, his back to her, his shoulders rigid. "What you did tonight was foolish," he said without preamble. "You made yourself vulnerable to gossip by defending me. I spoke the truth." "The truth?" He laughed bitterly. "What do you know of truth? What do you know of what happened?" "I know that you loved her," Imogen said quietly. I know that her death destroyed something in you. I know that you blame yourself for not saving her, even though no one could have saved her. How could you possibly know that? Because I have watched you for 5 months, my lord. I have seen how you punish yourself by denying every human connection, by living like a prisoner in your own house, by treating me as though affection were a crime. You did not let her die. You simply could not keep her alive, and you have never forgiven yourself for being human. He turned then, and the anguish in his face took her breath away. I held her hand for 18 hours while she screamed. The physician said the baby was positioned wrong, that they could do nothing without killing both mother and child. I brought in specialists from London, but by the time they arrived, it was too late. She looked at me at the end, and she said, "Please, Gideon, please make it stop." And I could do nothing. Nothing. That was not your fault. Was it not? His voice broke. My father told me that sentiment was weakness, that loving someone gave them power to destroy you. I dismissed his cruelty as the ravings of a bitter old man. Then Dorothea died, and I realized he was right. If I had not loved her so much, her death would not have destroyed me. If I had maintained proper distance, proper control, I would not have spent 7 years unable to think her name without wanting to die myself. So you married me, Imogen said slowly, understanding dawning, and you keep me at a distance to protect yourself. No, he crossed the room to stand before her, closer than he had ever stood outside of their marriage bed. I married you to produce an heir, but then you arrived, and you were nothing like what I expected. You were intelligent and capable, and you made my house come alive, and every day I watched you, I felt things I had promised myself I would never feel again. What things? She whispered. Admiration. Respect. His voice dropped to barely audible. You are the finest asset my life has ever acquired. The beginnings of affection I do not want to feel. Every book I left for you, every flower, every small gesture was me failing to maintain proper distance. And it terrifies me because I cannot lose someone again. I will not survive it. Imogen's eyes filled with tears. So you would rather live half alive than risk being fully human? Yes, he said simply. It is safer. It is not living at all. It is merely existing, and you are wasting both our lives in service to ghosts and old wounds. I know. His hands reached toward her, then fell back to his sides. I know, but I do not know how to be any other way. My father trained it into me for 20 years. Dorothea's death proved him right. How can I unlearn a lifetime of lessons? Imogen made a decision in that moment, one that would change everything or destroy what little they had. She stepped closer, took his face in her hands, and looked directly into his storm-gray eyes. Imogen continued. You begin by allowing yourself to feel something, not love, not yet, because I know you cannot bear that word. But perhaps you could allow yourself to like me, to enjoy my company, to stop hiding behind duty and distance. And if I try and fail, if I hurt you, then you hurt me. But I would rather be hurt by someone attempting to live than be ignored by someone merely surviving. She rose on her toes and kissed him, gently, on the mouth. He stood frozen for 3 heartbeats. Then he made a sound somewhere between a sob and a groan and kissed her back with a desperation that spoke of 7 years of starvation. A deep shudder ran through Imogen's slight frame from the unexpected, raw intensity. His arms came around her, seizing her against him, and for the first time since their wedding night, he held her as though she mattered. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gideon rested his forehead against hers. I do not know if I can do this, he whispered. Then we will learn together, Imogen replied. One day at a time, one small step toward warmth at a time. What if I fail? What if I am too broken? Then we will be broken together. But I believe you are not broken, Gideon. You are wounded, and wounds can heal if you let them. She used his given name for the first time, and she watched his face transform, some of the ice melting from his expression. He kissed her again, less desperately this time, more tenderly. He allowed himself to remain in the warm circle of her arms for a long moment, a simple acceptance he had denied himself for years. Then he took her hand and led her to his chambers, and what passed between them that night was not duty, but the beginning of genuine connection. They left London the next day, returning to Hadley Court by mutual, unspoken agreement. The house welcomed them back like a living thing, the rooms bright with summer sun. The gardens Imogen had restored were in full bloom. The walled garden, once choked by neglect, was now a tapestry of cultivated order, a quiet mirror of Gideon's potential. Gideon did not transform overnight. Change, real change, is slower and more difficult than fairy tales suggest. The initial progress was tentative. He would often retreat from conversation or rise abruptly after a shared meal, old habits clinging like frost. But he initiated. Dining with Imogen twice a week, awkward conversations gradually becoming easier. He asked her opinion on estate matters and actually listened to her answers. He showed her the music room with the locked door and played his cello for her, the mournful pieces gradually giving way to something less despairing. He learned to touch her outside of obligation, small gestures at first. A hand on her shoulder as he passed, sitting beside her rather than across from her. Eventually, he began to join her in her sitting room after dinner, reading while she worked on estate correspondence, simply being in her presence without purpose beyond companionship. He was learning slowly to be human again. It was not smooth progress. Some days he retreated into coldness, old habits rising like fortress walls. Some nights he woke from nightmares about Dorothea's death and could not bear to be touched. But he always apologized after, explaining his fears rather than hiding behind silence, and gradually the good days outnumbered the bad. August arrived with golden heat. One afternoon, Imogen found Gideon in the restored walled garden, standing before a bed of roses Dorothea had planted years before. She had not known the roses were there, overgrown and wild, until the gardeners cleared the space. "I should have them removed," he said without turning. "They are reminders of the past. Or they are proof that beautiful things can survive neglect and bloom again," Imogen suggested, coming to stand beside him. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "I am falling in love with you," he said, the words clearly costing him great effort. "I do not wish to. I am still frightened of what it means. But I need you to know that what I feel for you is not duty, or even mere affection anymore. It is more, and it grows stronger every day." Imogen's heart felt too large for her chest. "I love you," she replied simply. "I have loved you since I watched you play cello with all the passion you deny in daylight. I have loved you through your coldness and your fear and your slow, painful journey back to life. I will love you tomorrow and every day after." He kissed her then, in the garden where his first wife's roses bloomed, and it felt not like betrayal, but like blessing. The past and the present could coexist. Grief and love could share the same heart. He could honor Dorothea's memory while building a future with Imogen. That night, for the first time, he stayed after their lovemaking. He held her, whispered endearments in the darkness, traced the lines of her face with reverent fingers. He was learning, finally, to love without terror. September brought a discovery that tested everything they had built. Imogen was pregnant. When the physician confirmed it, Gideon's face went white, then gray, and he left the room without a word. Imogen found him hours later in the music room, sitting with his cello, but not playing, staring at nothing. "You are going to tell me," she said firmly, "that you are terrified of losing me as you lost Dorothea. You are going to say that you should never have allowed yourself to love me, that your father was right, that caring for someone only leads to devastation. He looked at her with eyes full of unshed tears. Yes. And I am going to tell you that life comes with no guarantees. I might die in childbed. You might fall from your horse tomorrow. The house might burn down tonight. We cannot control the future, Gideon. We can only choose to live fully in the present, to love fiercely despite the risks, to trust that the joy is worth the potential pain. But what if I lose you? The words came out as a broken whisper. Then you will grieve, and you will survive, and you will honor my memory by continuing to live rather than entombing yourself again. But you will not lose me. I am strong, and you will ensure I have the best physicians, the best care, everything necessary. We will face this together as we face everything together now. He stood and crossed to her, gathered her into his arms with desperate tenderness. I cannot lose you. You have become the center of my world. The thought of living without you is unbearable. Then trust that you will not have to, she said against his chest. Trust in me, in us, in the future we are building. The months of Imogen's pregnancy were difficult for Gideon. His fear manifested in excessive caution. He hired 3 physicians to monitor her health. He forbade her from any activity more strenuous than embroidery. He woke in the night to check that she was still breathing. It was suffocating and touching in equal measure. But he was also tender in ways she had never imagined from the cold man she had married. He read to her for hours. He played cello to soothe her when she felt ill. He learned to cook simple foods that appealed to her changing appetite. He told her stories of his childhood, the happy moments before his father's cruelty had hardened him. He became, against all odds, the husband she had not dared to hope for. In March of 1819, Imogen went into labor. Gideon's face became a mask of terror, but he stayed at her side, holding her hand, whispering encouragements, refusing to leave even when the midwife suggested it would be more appropriate. The labor was long and difficult. For hours, Imogen struggled, and Gideon's hand grew slick with his own sweat, his jaw clenched so tightly she feared his teeth would crack. But the 3 physicians he had hired worked in concert, and when complications arose, they were prepared. When Imogen's strength began to fail after 18 hours, when Gideon's face went gray with visceral memory of watching Dorothea die after exactly that amount of time, the lead physician made a decisive intervention that saved both mother and child. Their daughter was born at dawn, pink and squalling and perfect. Gideon held her with shaking hands and wept openly, tears streaming down his face as he pressed his forehead to Imogen's, his entire frame convulsed with a raw, desperate catharsis. She is perfect, he whispered. You are perfect. Thank God, thank God. They named her Claire after Imogen's mother. Gideon proved to be an attentive father, to everyone's surprise except Imogen's. He was gentle with the baby, patient during crying fits, devoted in ways that would have seemed impossible a year ago. He sang to her, nonsense songs in his deep voice that made Claire settle and gaze at him with wide eyes. He paced the nursery floors at night when she was fussy, refusing to leave the work entirely to nurses. He was, in every sense, present. But it was with Imogen that the greatest transformation was evident. He loved her without reservation now, the walls completely demolished. He told her daily that he loved her. He sought her opinion on estate matters and deferred to her judgment on household affairs. He could not pass her without touching her, small gestures of affection that spoke of gratitude for her continued existence. He had learned, finally, to live without fear ruling him. 2 years after Claire's birth, they welcomed a son they named Thomas. The labor was easier this time, perhaps because Gideon was calmer, trusting the process rather than fighting it with terror. When Thomas was born healthy and strong, Gideon laughed for the first time Imogen could remember, a sound of pure joy that echoed through Hadley Court and seemed to banish the last shadows from its corners. On a spring evening when Claire was 4 years old and Thomas 2, Imogen found Gideon in the music room, but this time the door stood open. He was playing a piece she had never heard before, something bright and hopeful rather than melancholy. Claire sat at his feet, playing with wooden blocks, while Thomas dozed in a cradle nearby. Gideon looked up when Imogen entered, and his face transformed with a smile that still had the power to take her breath away. "Come," he said, setting aside his cello. "Listen to what Claire has learned to sing." Their daughter, prompted by her father, sang a simple folk song in a clear, sweet voice, and Gideon watched her with such pride and love that Imogen felt tears prick her eyes. Later, when the children were abed and they sat together in Imogen's sitting room, Gideon took her hand and pressed it to his lips. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For refusing to accept my coldness, for insisting that I feel again, for loving me when I was unlovable, for giving me a family I never believed I could have, for showing me that my father was wrong about everything that mattered." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved my life, Imogen. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, day by day, until I remembered how to be human." "You saved yourself," she corrected gently. "I merely refused to let you hide forever." "Then thank you for your refusal. Thank you for your stubbornness and your strength and your insistence that I was worth redemption." She kissed him, long and sweet, and whispered against his lips, "You were always worth redemption. You simply needed to believe it yourself." That night, as the soft glow of the fire struggled against the late chill, lying in bed with Gideon's arms around her and the sound of their children breathing peacefully in the nursery nearby, Imogen reflected on the journey that had brought them from that frozen January day to this moment of perfect contentment. She had been so young when she married him, so frightened and alone. She had not known then that love could grow from the coldest soil, that patience and determination could melt the hardest heart, that two broken people could heal each other if they were brave enough to try. She had spent 3 years, 4 months, and 6 days shaping her life alongside Gideon Winter. For the first 11 months, she had been married to a ghost, a man entombed in ice and grief. For the 29 months since, she had been married to a man who was learning, slowly but surely, to live fully and love without fear. It was not the fairy tale romance she might have dreamed of as a girl. It was better. It was real, earned through struggle and growth, built on foundations of respect and partnership and genuine affection. They had both changed. She had found her strength and purpose. He had found his humanity again. Together they had created something neither could have achieved alone, a marriage that was truly a partnership, a love that had conquered fear. Outside their window, the garden she had restored bloomed in the moonlight, proof that neglected things could be made beautiful again. Inside, Hadley Court hummed with warmth and life, the house finally a home rather than a mausoleum. And in the master's chambers, Gideon Winter held his wife close and slept peacefully. No longer haunted by ghosts, no longer terrified of tomorrow, no longer the cold Earl who had commanded his bride to speak only when spoken to. Because Imogen Claire Winter had refused to be silenced. She had insisted on being heard, on being seen, on mattering, and in doing so, she had given him back his life. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end. If this story of love conquering fear touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who believes in second chances. Your support helps us continue creating stories of hope, healing, and love that transforms even the coldest hearts.